we're at a donut factory. Why?
Who doesn't like donuts? But look, the Federal Reserve banks, like Chicago Fed, get out and meet with business people in the district. In our case, it's heart of the Midwest. And this is a local manufacturing business in the food economy. And a lot of times you can get insights about the economy before they start showing up in the data, because the data only come out with a lag.
So when you think about your role as a Fed president and also someone that votes on interest rates this year, does anything that you saw here at Mellow Cream kind of make you think about the next move?
A bit. The Fed by law is supposed to maximize employment and stabilize prices. So it's inflation and employment that are really the twin towers of how we think about setting of rates. And there are parts of the job market where there's still basically labor shortage. It's very hard for people to
you kind of
find
saw
workers. And that's what you kind of saw here at the donut factory. And on the other side, if the cost structure is going to be that their costs are increasing and they end up having to pass that on to consumers, we got to weigh off the inflation part with the employment part.
Yeah, and so Chris was mentioning during the tour with you that, yes, there maybe is the beginnings of this impact of the tariffs, having a little bit of difficulty finding workers, but at the same time, any sort of upgrades that he would want to make with machinery would be very costly, in which case a lower interest rate from here might help.
Indeed. And look, those are the trade-offs. You're hearing from the businesses, the margins they have to balance against. The capital cost margins, the labor cost margins, and the how much will consumers pay for the product. That's not unlike the same dynamic that plays out at a high level around the table at the Fed, where you're trying to balance out inflation impacts, employment impacts, investment impacts.
And when you go to that table, certainly you bring memories of visits like this one here at Mellow Cream there, but you bring in a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah, indeed. I may physically bring some of the Mellow Cream donuts to the meeting.
Jay Powell would love that, I'm sure.
Jay Powell is a donut guy. But each of the reserve banks, of which there are 12 around the country, manifest one of the genius moves of the creation of the Federal Reserve System in the Federal Reserve Act was, let's not have the entire financial system of the United States controlled by Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. Let's have monetary independence built in by representing regions all around the country. We come to the meetings with a perspective. Mine is heart of the Midwest, 7th District, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of agriculture and food economy, and some of those are the most cyclical parts of the economy. So they are a little bit the canary in the coal mine, talking about where we are in the business cycle.
Overall economy, if we zoom out from Mellow Cream Donuts, we just got a jobs report that showed fewer job gains than we initially thought for several months this year, in addition to an inflation report this week that showed prices rising by 2.7% over the last year. In tandem, what does that tell you about the next move the Fed needs to make?
I usually don't like tying our hands if we've got a bunch of important data still to come before the next meeting. If there's weakness in the job market, that says we got to be on guard on that side of what the Fed does. In the inflation report, it was relatively mellow overall inflation, but there were some concerns like services prices, which are probably not being driven by tariffs, rising faster than we would want. So there's a little bit of element of let's get a few months of data before we make any conclusions. The hardest thing that the Fed ever has to do is get the timing right at moments of transition. And the only way to do that is try to figure out the through line, not lurch, this week the data came out, let's change what we're doing. You got to kind of look through that.
I mean, markets are pricing in a September rate cut. People who are running businesses are saying, hey, a rate cut would help. What's your response to that?
Look, it's not mine to respond. I think as we go through this fall, September, November, December, all of those are live moments that we could be cutting rates. Before there was April 2nd, for better part of a year, I've been saying I thought we were on a pretty solid economy with inflation coming back down to target and The unemployment rate showing pretty stable full employment, so rates probably could go down a fair amount. When that happens or how that happens is going to have to be determined by the data and by how this goes.
How is the data, the quality of the data? There's been some questions from the White House over the quality of the data coming out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Look, all I'll say is there's no such thing as perfect data. In an environment where there's uncertainty or you have questions about the data, you want as much data as you can get. You want data that you gather at Mellow Cream Donuts. You want data from private sector sources. You want data from the best of all the sources in the world, which is the U.S. government's official statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, I would say, is the gold standard, but you know, in Fed world, the gold standard is not one. That's not a good one. But that's the highest quality data we have. And we use the BLS data at the Fed we study that quite intensively, as does the private sector, because that's the best data going.
Something we have to acknowledge is that the president has been pretty hard on the Federal Reserve and Jay Powell and the board and the FOMC for cutting interest rates into the end of last year and then not cutting interest rates as soon as he entered office. He has argued the Fed is partisan. What's your response to that?
Well, look, when you join the Fed, you're kind of out of the partisan election business. So I'm not going to engage in the scrum. I started in the Fed in 2023. As soon as I came in, we raised rates pretty significantly and held them at a very high level for a long time. We then, as inflation was coming down, lowered rates a bit based on the economic conditions. And that is the thing that should drive Fed decision makings. In a way, it's what we call Fed independence, that central banks and all the richest countries of the world are as insulated from political interference as they can be, because it's really important. If you don't have central bank independence, inflation is coming back.
Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.